Every novel features unique characters who bring to life an interesting and wondrous world. This is often not as easy as some might think, and this world is full of new characters we need to get to know. The story of this book is that new monsters have emerged. Before this, people lived peaceful lives, and everything was incredibly calm. But the monsters have become powerful and strong. They quickly began attacking people and intimidating them with their terrifying gaze. In the region, absolutely everyone in the city was already talking about them. The young people believed that even the deepest darkness could be overcome by a bright world full of goodness. They began to hope for a better life. In the novel, this world was embodied by the heroes who came with good intentions and helped the residents. Thanks to this, Korea began to fight the monsters. Much time passed. People embraced new feelings and relaxed as life returned to normal, while the group of brave individuals never ceased to carry out their mission. It's time to meet the main character. He had big blue eyes and was dressed entirely in the color of a clear sky. He was the future of the city. Everyone who competed with him was left behind. The man was the creator of this beautiful world he had built himself. It was like an intriguing game. Over time, a small problem arose. Whenever verdicts were announced, everyone tensed up, eager to find out who the long-awaited winner was. That person turned out to be a young man. He was overjoyed when he heard the curator's verdict. It was the world that Joe had described in his book. The man was 100% certain that this was exactly that world. It was shown on the main screen where all the participants in this difficult competition were announced. Of course, as always, there were competitors who envied other people's success. This case was no exception. Everyone mocked him and said he was just lucky. There was also the big problem that his classmates were incredibly smart but didn't really want to interact with one another. There was a gentleman among them as well. He was only 17. While the girl looked at the screen and read some information, she looked incredibly confident. The guy was the main character in this game. He was the one who wanted to lead everyone into a world ruled exclusively by bloodthirsty monsters. The cadet who managed to take second place was a handsome young man with exquisite white hair and yellow eyes that constantly shimmered. The king was certain of it. The partner was the grandson of an oligarch who owned a large clothing company. The prince had skills very similar to those of the main character and was a highly principled person. At the moment, they were all cadets. The warrior often felt deep down that no one loved him, and sometimes he would voice this to those around him. The young men's fight would resemble a battle of shadows, and there they stood together on the red carpet, looking at the judge. The young man realized he had truly entered this world. The author felt strange. He didn't know how one could end up in one's own story. He decided to find out what position he held here, and it would be good to learn his name. His partner asked if the other man had spoken to him. He replied that he had. The prince asked him to repeat it because he hadn't heard a thing. The writer was called by a very strange name. The man didn't remember anyone ever addressing him that way, and he wanted to figure it out more and more. And then panic took hold of him. He was terrified when he saw that instead of a face, he had a question mark. The handsome young man didn't know what to do. The young man didn't look good. He didn't like himself from the very first moment, and he had the feeling that he wasn't playing any role here. While his colleagues were having fun, everyone nicknamed him Cadet. He didn't have any friends yet. The young man wanted to gain some support, but that didn't happen. Negative thoughts drove him crazy. The handsome young man slumped and wanted to cheer himself up somehow, but didn't know how to do it. In this world, it seemed like everyone was on their own. One day, the king received a strange message. Someone wanted to make a remake based on his story. The hero didn't know how to respond to all this or whether he should. The stranger wanted to do this with a novella that had been on hold for a long time. The companion decided to go to the bathroom and freshen up a bit with cold water. He still couldn't come to terms with such a strange face. The guy wondered why a question mark, of all things. There were countless symbols in the world. Every morning, the man looked at himself with a look of disgust and didn't want to live because of it. He was in a book he had written himself. The man had forced himself into someone else's body, in which he often felt uncomfortable. There were so many characters. For 2 whole weeks, the boy never figured out who had brought him into this world or why. He tried quite a few methods, but nothing worked. The man finally realized that he would have to stay in this world for a while, and that at least 10 years would have to pass before the story came to an end. The young man's hands began to shake. It seemed wild to him to spend so long in such a world, so he resolutely decided to return to his hometown. To start with, he needed to stay in this world and make at least a few acquaintances so he wouldn't go crazy. To do that, he had to go to school. For the protagonist, this was something new because there were so many people at school, and most of them were classmates who might have been from other countries. The boy had no intention of giving up or panicking. On the contrary, his enthusiasm drew him into society, and his competitors were learning various combat skills. And then the man remembered one interesting warrior. Unfortunately, he didn't recall what skills the warrior possessed, but they could get to know each other and talk about something. The young man hoped these skills would help him in this world. He calmly opened the door and entered the training room. The man was a little nervous. Now let's shift our focus to the central area of the club, where allies and rivals gathered, all striving to appear cooler and stronger. Joe, as usual, behaved very calmly. He was incredibly confident and wasn't afraid of new challenges, but he didn't want to show that. Very soon, people began forming different groups, both for training and for various challenges. The handsome guy was curious to see what the consequences would be. As it turned out, the days flew by incredibly fast, but the king didn't want to interact with such people for a full 10 years. He kept to himself. Someone sent his partner a strange box. It said that his belongings were inside. The prince decided to open it right away and see what was there. And then the guy froze. He hadn't expected to see his personal laptop inside. He shouted with joy, but at the same time was a little scared because he didn't know what to expect. Suddenly, various data started loading. The young man didn't want to miss any information, so he decided to watch everything closely and not get distracted. When the man looked at the computer, he saw his own image there. His surprise knew no bounds. The gentleman was delighted that he now had a normal face. He was eager to find out how it all happened so quickly and who had sent him his computer. He had many questions. After this synchronization, the handsome man was able to understand himself and identify his strengths and weaknesses. The king knew how to improve himself. All the information about him was right before his eyes. His partner decided to look at the screen and learn much more about himself. Nothing made sense. The prince found some strange story on the laptop, and he wanted his stats to keep improving. The young man understood the most important thing in this story, namely that if he wanted to get out of this, he had to fight for his future. The man smiled slyly. The young man knew he had to work on himself, because if he just sat around, nothing would ever work out. And there was no guarantee that the gentleman would be able to leave this story behind. The gentleman was desperate to find any information that might help him complete the task, while the young man was counting on his luck. The handsome young man decided to play a game and try to multiply his funds. The game began, his hands were shaking, and the king started to sweat, but the thrill overwhelmed him. The prince decided to calm down and think about his chances. He still had magical powers that, in theory, could help him complete his task. The young man decided to give it a try. He got very lucky the first and second times. He concluded that he was on a winning streak, but he wanted more. Then an error popped up saying he couldn't change the course of the game. This annoyed the young man, and he slammed his fist hard on the table. It turned out that he couldn't perform the tricks that the man himself had been doing. He was disappointed and decided to figure out how to solve this, specifically how to improve his success rate. He didn't have any ideas yet. The handsome young man folded his arms and decided to do something. Fortunately, he still had about 10,000 points left in his account. They could be put to use somehow. A new day began. The king was already in class. A new instructor came to visit them. His partner listened attentively and wanted to make a good impression. The young man introduced himself and spoke very loudly and clearly. He explained that he would be their advisor for the entire year, and the students listened attentively. The young people wanted to discuss the rankings with their colleagues, but the man quickly cut them off and stopped the conversation. He looked angry. The man went on to explain that the club was not a place for personal entertainment. He urged them not to fall behind in their studies, as this was where true heroes were forged. A minute later, he asked them to stand up and follow him. The young men looked at each other and realized they had no choice but to obey the supervisor. Right at the start, he asked them to choose a suitable and comfortable weapon for themselves. Jack was very shy. He hadn't expected there to be tests already. The teenagers walked around calmly, choosing what would be best for them. The handsome guy didn't like this attitude toward the task and asked them to hurry up. They had to think quickly and decisively, because a weapon must stay with a warrior for at least 6 months. The boy chose a katana, and the girl chose a bow. Absolutely all the characters made their choices quickly, but the hero just couldn't figure out what he liked. He looked at everything carefully and analyzed it. The young man relied heavily on the description provided by his gadget. He wanted to choose a weapon as quickly as possible that he could get used to right away. The gentleman kept turning his head to see if anyone was paying attention to him, while the curator stood at attention and read the information from his tablet. The young man decided to take a pistol. He thought he could handle it easily, while the instructor called Joe over and asked him a couple of questions. The man decided to show his choice to the warrior. He gave him a rather harsh look, but said that the choice was entirely up to the person, and the responsibility did not fall on his shoulders either. For the young man, the pistol was a good weapon because he didn't know how to use various forms of magic like his colleagues did. The handsome redhead decided to show off all his power to the people standing next to him. The king leaped forward and shattered the bullet from the gun. Without exception, his colleagues all relied on their powerful magic, but the young man was curious to see how he could fight without it. He waited to see what would happen next. He calmly gathered his things and decided to go about his business. In his life, the young man had never picked up a sword, and he couldn't be compared to his classmates. The young man carried his small suitcase and wondered if he had made the right choice. Jack wanted to prove to everyone that he would succeed in his plan. It was also important for him to choose a skill, and meanwhile, Joe was heading to training with his large sword. There he saw a colleague. The girl was rather rude and didn't feel much like talking to anyone, so she said she just wanted to train. The handsome guy mentioned that a new archer had joined their class. The beauty turned to him and asked who it could be. She had a hunch. The king mentioned Jack. The little girl scowled and said she didn't consider him a normal shooter because the young lady didn't like guns. Her companion asked his partner not to blurt out such loud words into the wind. She glared at the boy angrily. Despite the girl's bad behavior, the man behaved very well and didn't intend to criticize anyone. Sometimes he even praised them. The newlyweds were chatting calmly when a beautiful woman suddenly piped up and asked him not to tell her what to do. She didn't want to hear anything. The man didn't understand her reaction. Meanwhile, the hero began to feel a tickling in his ear. He wondered if anyone was talking about him. The character pondered how to improve his strength and how he could become the best. He could easily gain 10,000 points in new skills and solve his shooting problems. This piqued the handsome young man's interest, and he decided to focus on developing that particular skill. The king finally decided what he wanted to do and what he would have to work with. His partner put his hands on his shoulders and decided where to start. The main task was to hold out until the end of this story. The lady explained that the students needed to focus on clearing the tower. The hero read the information on his tablet while listening to his instructor. At first glance, there weren't many lines, but in reality, there were far more. The lecture went on for quite a while. Everyone behaved calmly, especially Jack, but the beauty couldn't take it anymore and screamed. She didn't understand why she needed this information. The little girl wanted to show off all her skills in a real battle. But then the man burst in and announced that they had to leave for the post office in 20 minutes. The princess was overjoyed, but her colleagues weren't in the mood to celebrate just yet. The guy was carefully analyzing the information he'd heard, and so was his partner. It was a real battle. Each team had 4 people, and a group could include various cadets with different strengths and skills. The man announced loudly that everyone had to get used to their team, and now he wanted to see who would be on his team. The students listened intently to the results. The young man clenched his teeth tightly at this assignment. He wasn't happy with the decision, but didn't dare to object. The young man found himself on a team with the princess. In books, it often happens that the main character is surrounded by many specific characters. Among the characters, the girl stood out. She had a cold gaze. The beauty had large pink eyes and was dressed in athletic wear. The girl was an incredibly important character. She had been part of the clan for a long time, so the gentleman decided to get to know her better. The fighter decided not to be shy and went over to introduce himself to the newcomer. He greeted her and told her they were on the same team, and the young woman looked at him. The beauty politely greeted them and added that she was pleased to meet them. The guy didn't quite understand why the young woman was speaking that way. They seemed to be about the same age. The young lady asked where the other teammate was. Less than 5 minutes later, he emerged from the other side, and the group turned their eyes toward him. The princess looked at the new warrior in surprise. She asked if it was really him. The young man understood that he needed to make a good impression. The girl disliked insecure people more than anything. And then the handsome young man came running up. He was in a positive mood. The king asked if this was really the man who had chosen the pistol. They chatted for a bit, and then the mentor arrived. He was very unhappy that his students weren't studying, but were doing something strange, and everyone got scared. He outlined their plan of action and decided to speed things up a bit. The team quickly decided to go about their business, or, more precisely, to their first mission. The girl asked everyone to look around carefully. They had information about the monsters at their fingertips, and they could see exactly where they were. By the time the guy had been running, he was incredibly exhausted. His physical condition left much to be desired, but he didn't stop and kept running. The green-haired beauty quickly got her bearings. She was quite a nimble young lady, and the difficulty level of the task was moderate. And finally, the team arrived at the location where the monster was supposed to be. The princess played the leading role in this mission. She was in charge of everything. Suddenly, the monster emerged. It was incredibly huge and had massive teeth. It was called the Black Humpbacked Octopus. The group hadn't expected this. The hero barely had enough strength to run to the mission. The girl suggested they discuss their plan of action. The monster was of low rank, but it looked formidable. Fortunately, its attack power wasn't that great, but when it senses danger nearby, various sharp fangs emerge from behind its hump. The eight-legged creature could release small offspring. The guy suggested killing them first, and the girl said they needed a good marksman for that. The commander-in-chief said she could handle it. The heroine asked everyone to step back a bit and withdraw their magical power, and everyone agreed. The monster had a high regeneration rate for various body parts. The young man listened to the girl in surprise and couldn't even imagine how they would defeat it. The young lady shouted and asked if everyone was ready. The young man turned and looked at her. So far, no one had given an answer. Everyone remained silent. The monster, for its part, had no intention of giving up. It sought to destroy everything. The team didn't waste any time either and decided to take action. The gentleman decided to draw the monster's attention to himself. He wanted the octopus to come closer to the shore, where it would be easier to defeat it. It quickly doused him with water. The gentleman hadn't expected this and decided to flee. He gathered himself quickly, weapon in hand. The handsome young man also got ready but looked flustered. He had never taken part in such missions before, whereas the young woman looked incredibly confident. His partner noticed that the enemy was already starting to crack. The news cheered him up, and he realized that they would be able to defeat a formidable foe. The woman, however, kept her eyes fixed on the monster because she realized she couldn't expect anything from them, so she decided to watch everything closely. The girl was an incredibly skilled warrior. She had ranked 7th when she joined the club, and many respected her for it. The young man ran toward the shore. The beauty swung her weapon over the octopus's head. This didn't scare the monster much, so he didn't want to rush or retreat. The little girl screamed and warned her partner that small enemy fragments were flying ahead. The young lady began to turn her head quickly. Meanwhile, the young man wasted no time and decided to crouch down with his weapon. The young woman screamed, but the man had no intention of retreating from this battle. From the very beginning of this story, the man had been out of the picture for a long time, so it was difficult for him to count on a high reward for the task he had completed. The handsome young man had only one course of action. He wanted to intervene in the events that all the main characters of this book were going through, while his partners watched the enemy closely. The young lady asked him once again not to interfere here, but the warrior had no intention of listening to her. He knew what he was doing, and the monster began to crawl onto the shore. There were already dozens of monsters, growing in number with each passing moment. The young man realized he would never have such an opportunity again, so he decided to act. At such a crucial moment, everything depended on the man's skill. He aimed his pistol and began firing rounds at the various small octopus offspring. At first, Lily was flustered, but after a couple of minutes, she pulled herself together and gave the order for the whole team to attack the monster. Everyone obeyed. The woman ran incredibly fast toward her target and decided to draw her sword immediately. The whole team was determined to defeat their sworn enemies, and the battle lasted a long time. Fortunately, the mission was a complete success. A very strange substance was oozing out of the octopus, and the group wanted to investigate what it was. The gentleman exhaled. He was overjoyed that they had defeated such a colossal giant. The young woman turned her gaze to the handsome man. The newlyweds had defeated it in a full 58 minutes and 58 seconds. For some reason, the bride wasn't happy. She grimaced. Then a sign popped up saying they had defeated the boss. The woman looked very surprised. The team had placed 16th. As it turned out, someone had been filming the whole thing on video. The woman was disappointed. She had suspected that someone had been watching them. The girl wanted to close the gap between their teams. The beauty asked if that was all the little one was capable of, and the guy laughed slyly but didn't answer. Suddenly, the young lady got up from her desk and walked over to her colleague, while the men were joking around with each other, and the others were watching Lily. The princess hugged her old friend. The lady hadn't expected this. She was used to seeing the young woman as stern, but here the queen looked cheerful. The girl asked how her practical training was going. Her colleague replied that it was going well, but she wanted to secure a higher position. The friends turned their attention to the young man. The beauty was a little angry at the young man because they were late for the assignment because of him. The gentleman realized they were talking about him behind his back. The little girl, on the other hand, praised him and said he had beaten everyone pretty quickly. Just then, her partner ran up. He was a nice guy, so he liked to hug everyone. After a while, the hero decided to go to the gym located nearby. Training turned out to be quite a challenge. After the workout, the protagonist couldn't check the notifications he was receiving. He began to recall moments from the battle that had taken place just recently. Thanks to his regular workouts, the young man had significantly improved his physical condition and began to feel better. He decided to take a break. It was already late in the evening. The girl was analyzing data on her computer. She read everything carefully and didn't want to miss a thing. As it turned out, she was watching a video of their match. The young woman was amazed by the young man's reaction. At first, Lily couldn't believe her eyes. She felt the urge to test how many times she could pull the trigger of the pistol. After a couple of minutes, she realized that with such a reaction time, she had no chance of competing with her partner. The young woman realized that the young man's reaction was different from everyone else's. She decided to compare him with the other cadets and realized that no one else had such quick reflexes. The girl began to wonder why she hadn't paid attention to the young man when they were in school, and then she received a strange message. She decided to check it out. The gentleman also received a video, but at that time, he was very busy with his work. The message came from a beautiful woman. The little girl thought the handsome guy was just pretending to be interested. The young lady thought there was something incredibly sweet about him. She liked him. Within a few minutes, the smile had vanished from her face. The young lady decided to go back to her important business and think about something else. Now let's shift our focus to the boss's office. There was an employee holding a folder of documents in his hand. The lady asked him to pay attention to something special. A group of people were discussing Joe. It seemed to them that there was something special about him. So the young man decided to talk about his performance and strengths. The man had a sharp sword technique and was skilled in various combat skills. When he fought, it seemed to everyone as if it were a dance in which every movement was carefully thought out. Now everything made sense to the director, specifically why another company had wanted to poach him, and the workers listened intently. Eventually, the conversation turned to Jack, who had chosen the pistol. Management decided to identify his strengths as well, and they analyzed the handsome young man's background. The young woman was most surprised when she heard that he had fired more than 60 shots in 3 seconds, 59 of which hit the target. Everyone was also curious about how his trigger finger could move so quickly. His partner looked incredibly graceful, and at the academy they called him a heretic. As soon as the prince changed clubs, he began using a pistol instead of a sword. Usually it's hard for anyone to switch to a different weapon, but for a warrior, it was no problem. The epiphany came to him at 17. His superiors realized he was developing quite quickly, but if a young man is skilled with a pistol, there is nothing unusual about that. The secretary said that, whatever the case, they definitely needed to take a closer look at him, but the lady disagreed because she had a lot on her plate. Wednesday morning began. Everyone was actively training and learning new skills, and Joe was swinging his sword as usual. The ladies trained well, and today was the day for one-on-one combat. The matches were conducted exclusively in teams, with 2 cadets in each. All the cadets used their primary weapons in the matches to fight their opponents. This made it easy to evaluate their performance and ensured no one got hurt. The instructor arrived and yelled at the author because he had allowed himself to sleep a little longer. The frightened cadet barely opened his eyes. The coach explained that his pistol was still being manufactured, and training with a regular pistol was very dangerous for others. And then the training got pretty intense. The handsome guy was taught how to defend himself properly and effectively against his opponent's strikes. It was incredibly hard for him to endure such a test. His partner didn't give up and wanted to prove that he could handle it. It was difficult for him to fight this guy because he constantly changed the angle of his strikes and shifted his stance. The man was quite a skilled fighter. He possessed all the necessary qualities. The young man was fast, agile, and knew how to strike at weak spots, so the author decided to dodge his blows. His colleagues pointed at the hero and laughed. His partner found this very unpleasant because it was the first time he'd encountered such behavior, but the prince decided to ignore it. After a grueling sparring session, the warrior decided to go buy himself a bottle of soda from a vending machine, and just then, a girl approached him. She gave the guy a strange look and decided not to waste time and go about her business, when suddenly, a can of Coke flew toward her. The young woman asked if the man was picking on her. The guy asked her what she was talking about, and Jack explained that the lady had really helped him with his exams. The young man wanted to get to know her better. For him, it was a good experiment to test her. He wanted to find out how many points he would get for their conversation. The girl didn't want to socialize and tossed the gentleman's bottle back into his hands. Jack looked at her in surprise and didn't understand why. The pretty girl said he couldn't call her you without her permission. The handsome guy apologized and remained silent after that, and the little girl left with her bag to run some errands. The young lady felt that the weight of her bag had changed. She decided to take a look inside and saw the bottle there again. At first, the princess wanted to throw it in the trash, but she realized the drink wasn't to blame, so she calmly put it back. Now the conversation will turn to the monsters that look very much like humans. Fortunately, the main characters fought them very skillfully and were already used to facing such trials. And the monsters weren't really that scary. It's just that the beginning is always unknown, but the author knew his book well, so he was prepared for this. The boy even wanted to be part of that scene, so he decided he needed to find a way to sneak onto the museum tour. But just then, the guide arrived. There were many people at the club who were learning to draw and write. They were focused not only on self-development, but also on socializing with the cadets. On that day, the author was planning to visit him. Meanwhile, the man thanked everyone for participating in his travelers club. The gentlemen smiled warmly in response, and were delighted that things were off to such a great start. There were quite a few newcomers this year. When the gentleman received an invitation to this establishment, at first he couldn't believe it had actually happened. He thought someone was playing a prank on him. The curator decided to explain everything in more detail, and it turned out that every 2 months they would travel to different parts of the world. The guy suggested that everyone split into pairs and work on the tasks together. They could set off on a trip right away. The young man's main goal for the day was to visit the old museum. He asked everyone to hurry up so they could get started on something. The girl didn't really like that idea, so she decided to object and suggested they split up so everyone could be on their own. The gentleman was soft-hearted, so he agreed without hesitation. Suddenly, the young girl asked for something else, and the gentleman didn't know what to expect. She asked him again not to address her informally, but the handsome young man had completely forgotten about it. So the king felt a little awkward that he hadn't kept his promise. Here is the museum the prince had been talking about for so long. It contained a vast collection of weapons, and it has the largest hall. The young woman behaved a bit rudely. She decided to press her head against the glass and examine everything thoroughly. And then the young man realized that the main character of this book was nearby. He wanted to talk to him and ask him some questions, and the handsome guy turned around. The man asked Joe if he was staring at the 7 knives. Then he decided to greet him politely. But the main character didn't understand what Jack wanted from him. The handsome young man decided to apologize for his behavior. He had just been lost in thought. The main character asked if the man standing before him was indeed the same marksman. The colleagues had even joined the same club. This surprised the young man, and he sensed just how confident the man was in himself now. And then suddenly something began falling from above at high speed. The elderly man decided to look up and check what was falling. A radio report stated that monsters were standing near the museum, shaking the building. People looked at each other in shock, not knowing what to do. In the panic, everyone wanted to get out of the building as quickly as possible. Colleagues couldn't control their emotions and were simply pushing each other as hard as they could. A little girl was falling from the top floor. Fortunately, my partner was nearby and managed to catch her. Meanwhile, the woman asked everyone to calm down and not panic. She added that if anyone ran out into the courtyard now, the monsters would devour them in an instant. The woman quickly drew her weapon. The young woman asked the young man to grab the gun as quickly as possible and wait for backup. The newlyweds had to protect the people. The thief looked very scary. He had a cunning gaze that seemed to pierce right through a person, and he was striding confidently toward the heroes. This villain was destined to influence the main character's development in this amazing story. Everyone tensed up. Joe grabbed his sword when he saw the criminal start moving toward him at incredible speed. The atmosphere had become extremely tense in the last few minutes. In the book, Jack was supposed to take him down very quickly, but how it will actually play out is a mystery. Everyone is giving it their all to win. One of the colleagues fell to the floor. Everyone looked at each other in fear. The plot was completely different from the one in the book. The beauty turned to her partner. The handsome guy fell and showed no signs of life. The little girl didn't know what to do in such a situation. The prince immediately ran to his friend to check on him. The enemy was just gaining momentum. He possessed great strength that constantly drove him to kill. So the princess decided to start shooting at him with her bow. All 10 shots hit the target dead center. One even struck him in the head, but the enemy didn't fall. On the contrary, he kept laughing, which infuriated the heroine. The man decided to pounce on the lady and strike her. The handsome young man shouted and begged the young woman to run away as fast as she could, but she had no intention of doing so. And then Joe jumped in, intent on getting revenge on the guy. He shielded the queen with his body and continued the fight. Suddenly, what everyone had feared so much happened. The young man's body changed drastically, and he was a different person. His partner had never seen anything like it in his life. The villain stepped on the hero with his feet. The prince tried not to give up and to hold his ground, while the girl was still shooting. The Lord's mighty strength slammed the beauty into the wall, which simply split in two. The warrior was trembling all over and didn't know what to do. The handsome young man couldn't understand why he had no control over anything here. He had written it all himself, but the plot in reality was slightly different. The heroes were still fighting. His partner got the chance to print something and make a change. He wanted to alter the magical power of his bullets to take down the mighty enemy. This crucial bullet fell from the sky. The prince quickly grabbed it, loaded it into his pistol, and aimed at his opponent. At that very moment, while Joe was fighting the villain, the warrior aimed his pistol at him, intending to hit him and end it all. The handsome guy managed to hit the mark dead center. The young man hadn't expected that. He immediately fell onto his back and couldn't figure out what had happened to him. It didn't end there. On the contrary, the man managed to get up and continue the bloody battle. The gentleman wanted to take revenge on everyone who had wronged him. The king sank to his knees. He was dejected because he had no strength left. His weapon was broken, but his partner decided to stand up after all and face his fear head on. Joe didn't waste any time either. He stood up and ran toward the enemy. The young man hadn't expected this. The gentleman wanted to end it once and for all. Jack decided to help his friend. Together they overcame such a brutal man, and the king decided to kneel on one knee. The girl clenched her fists in fear. The handsome guy walked up to her and asked if she was okay. Everyone was incredibly frightened by these events. The king wanted to touch her with his hand, but the young lady quickly pushed his hand away. Everyone present in the hall did not understand such behavior. According to the book's account, her brother was supposed to come and calm his sister down. Suddenly someone entered, and the prince turned his gaze. It turned out to be a young woman. She came over and asked if she had sorted everything out, and in the meantime, an ambulance arrived to help the people. First, the queen decided to tell everyone about the criminal who had frightened everyone so much. The staff listened attentively to the woman's story. As soon as the woman found out who was inside, she ran to save her loved ones without a moment's hesitation. She paid no heed to the doctor's words. Everyone inside quickly left the room, while the beautiful woman wondered how she could start a conversation with the king. Her partner hadn't expected such an interesting encounter. He stared at the young woman in shock, while she smiled warmly in return and greeted the prince. The warrior informed her that the person the young lady was looking for was inside the museum. She thanked him for the information, and the young lady went there immediately. Suddenly, the queen stopped. She wondered how the man knew she was looking for this particular person, while the young man decided to spend some time on the computer. So far, everything was going according to plan. The story was becoming more and more interesting and touching, and the man calmly planned what he wanted to do next. The book was based on a gentleman's story, but he noticed some details that were different. Those had already been changed by the person who sent him the computer. Jack was a little upset, but he continued to study the information on his laptop, and then he received a notification. The handsome guy looked at it right away. It said that the main character would win the game, but there was a high risk of losing the reader's interest. The king began to wonder what that could mean. The coach rushed over as soon as he found out what had happened. He asked everyone to calm down, saying he would explain all the details of the situation a little later. The prince asked how the girl was doing. The mentor replied that she had gone home to her parents and had been sick a lot lately. The warrior was saddened. When everyone had left, only the two friends remained. The young man asked why the man hadn't said anything to the girl. The older man had no answer. The gentleman asked what exactly he was supposed to tell her. Joe replied that it was about her brother. For some reason, the gentleman remembered that the letter also contained some other remark, so he decided to remain silent again. Jack couldn't help himself and asked what had happened to the little girl's loved one. The handsome young man asked him not to pretend he didn't know. But in reality, the king didn't know what they were talking about. His partner suggested postponing their conversation, and the prince went home, where he searched for something on social media. A certain girl caught the guy's eye. Her profile was posted there, and the man decided to carefully review and analyze everything. Now we'll talk about the operation to suppress the human monsters. This was possible for the main character's allies in the story. At that time, the beauty was only 13 years old. She was very proud of her brother, who had become a hero to her. That was the version of the book. The young man reread everything in surprise, and once again, the gentleman received a new notification. It stated that all changes would be included in the message after the young lady confirmed them. The gentleman didn't understand the full meaning of these strange messages that were filling his head, but excitement overwhelmed Jack. He was eager to reread everything. The princess sat alone in her chamber. A close friend wanted to support her and visit her, and the staff was constantly by her side. The young lady was incredibly happy to see her father. She asked why he wasn't at work. The prince was more concerned about the condition of his child. and the young woman replied that everything was fine. The man decided to ask if the woman needed any additional tests. She didn't want to do anything because she felt that everything was fine. The girl asked her father if she could talk to him one more time before being discharged. The young man hadn't expected such a question and didn't know what to say. A minute later, he gathered his thoughts and replied that he would definitely come back one more time. The young woman was very happy to hear those words directed at her. On top of that, demons were invading the young man's mind. They were among the strongest monsters, evolving at an incredible rate, and people were turning into them. This period didn't last long. In fact, half of it had already passed. In this confusing situation, there was only one correct answer. The demon could possess someone, but it would simply kill that person very quickly. The man lay unconscious, and the girl came to him to offer support. The beauty felt sorry for her loved one. No one knew what to do with him because there were no signs that a monster had possessed the gentleman, although the symptoms were identical in some respects. Unfortunately, at the time, there was no specific method to stop the criminal. Even when heroes enter the fray, someone on the team dies. The little girl looked straight into the handsome man's eyes. She believed she could wake him with a sweet glance, when suddenly, the young lady noticed something. But as it turned out, it was just the princess's imagination. For the first time, the girl sat like that next to a person she couldn't help in any way, and the staff announced that the meeting time was up. The beauty touched the gentleman's body and went about her business. She had a strong desire to visit him again the very next day. Her eyes seemed to light up. It was already quite late. The lady was sorting through documents that were going to the archives. Behind her stood a handsome young man who urged her to hurry, fearing they might get caught. But the young woman herself wasn't afraid of anyone or anything. She decided to sit down at the computer again, while her partner, on the other hand, was very afraid and stood his ground. The queen discovered that traces of magic containing a particle of light had been found in the body of the human monster, meaning that the person who had defeated it was incredibly strong. The cadets from other groups were often compared to him. Meanwhile, the prince kept begging to leave so that no one would notice them, which annoyed the woman. Finally, the girl decided to check the ranking database. She carefully analyzed the information and found that the club was ranked 934th. Now let's return to the character. He noticed something interesting, namely that his friends hadn't seen the hero's laptop, and the guy wondered why that was. And then the list of his acquaintances who were competing appeared before him. The young man begged to switch to an easier opponent, and the girl bowed. Meanwhile, Jack received a notification indicating that some new settings were supposed to appear within a 30-meter radius of him. This was incredibly effective compared to the messages from the author. And just then, a young woman approached him and wanted to compete. The queen started laughing at him when the handsome guy refused. The woman asked if he was afraid, and everyone turned their attention to them. It was unpleasant for the prince to hear, so he decided to respond rudely. The girl called him a bad person, and suddenly the conversation was interrupted. The teacher came in and asked what they were doing there. She asked the pretty girl to return to her seat and stop being aggressive, and the little girl got angry. The boy had his own goals and didn't want to apologize. He was determined to kill her brother, and he wanted to grow stronger and stronger with each passing day. The young man understood that even if he started befriending the queen, Jack would still have to betray her sooner or later. People had gathered for some kind of large-scale spectacle. The gentleman asked if everyone was present, and he greeted everyone. As it turned out, it was a class from the Truth program. The leader of this club was on stage. Their main task was to analyze monsters and find their weaknesses, and the gentleman told everything in an interesting way. The handsome young man had a rather unique appearance and was very skilled at speaking on stage in front of a large crowd of people. When this place began to develop, strange things were happening in the main storyline. Namely, cadets were disappearing, and on top of that, monsters were frequently attacking. The reason the king decided to join was to help innocent people fight such terrifying monsters. His partner didn't want to drag things out, so he decided to start the conversation. Today was an introductory meeting, and the discussion would focus on the development of this place. The prince went on to talk about various monsters, listing the different traits that could influence their development. The girl listened attentively, even though she already knew all of this. The guy decided to ask a few questions. The beauty answered them pretty quickly. They weren't exactly difficult, to put it mildly. It all ended rather quickly. The man asked anyone who wanted to ask a question to stay in the hall, while the young man turned to the little girl. The young lady ignored him and walked away. When the princess had gone a short distance, she asked if the young man was going to a gathering. He hadn't expected such a question. The young lady explained that she had managed to find some information about various monsters. This piqued the gentleman's interest, so he decided to listen to her. The handsome young man wanted to tell her about a strange group of monsters that had been created 50 years ago. The young woman turned her head and listened. The queen didn't understand the prince because he spoke in riddles. She decided to ask what exactly the warrior wanted to tell her, and the young man replied by describing the thieves' weaknesses. First, the young man pointed out the blue spot on the monster's leg, saying that if they hit it right there, it wouldn't be able to move at all. The lord immediately noted that this information wasn't free and asked his companion if she had any weapons. The queen reacted with surprise. To be more precise, the gentleman wanted the queen to get him a certain interesting pistol. The woman listened attentively to his speech. The lady decided to ask what had formed the handsome man's opinion. He looked surprised, and the girl asked if the speaker had any further evidence. The king had nothing to hide, so he had no intention of lying. The beauty was outraged by her companion's behavior because she realized she had wasted her time. Her partner understood that if she let his words go in one ear and out the other, the information that had cost so much would simply be a worthless piece of paper. Malenka pointed to the monster's blue spot, telling everyone to look for it. Everyone listened carefully and searched thoroughly. Meanwhile, the young man went to find out how much he could borrow for the long-awaited loan. They told him the amount was 300 million. Jack was stunned by the amount, but his colleagues at the bank told him that the money could easily be repaid and asked him not to worry. The man was taking an incredible risk by spending the rest of his life paying off such a large debt. He paused to think and realized he had to make a decision. The gentleman realized he had to find a way to make money, but there weren't many options for success, so he decided to sell the corpses of monsters. Suddenly, someone interrupted his thoughts and came to tell him about a package. The handsome man wasn't expecting anything, so he was very surprised by the news. He quickly opened the door and looked to see who was there. There was no one, just the package. The king bent down to get a closer look at the briefcase. Meanwhile, the red-haired girl said hello and thanked his partner for his help. She wished the hero a safe trip, and he thanked her and went on his way. The city was large, but before that, the prince was struck by the fact that when he told the worker who he was, she quickly changed her attitude toward him. This area was quite interesting. It had many tourists year-round. The warrior shouted and announced that he was recruiting people for his team. The young man really wanted to make friends with someone. In this small town, there were rumors that a man who catches monsters with his bare hands lives here. Everyone was trying to find someone. Some were looking for team members, others for customers for their product, and the girl was serving people and quoting large sums of money. Two people were standing near the restaurant and arguing, and behind them lay green monsters. It was profitable to sell the monsters to the agent. The guy also wanted to have a good agent. He was walking calmly when suddenly a man asked if he had accidentally come to hunt monsters. The young man asked the stranger to introduce himself. He told him everything right away, saying that he had once given Jack his personal business card. When the gentleman took matters into his own hands, he quickly remembered this agent. They talked a little more, and the gentleman wanted to tell him more about the company. But the hero had another mysterious handsome man on his mind, who also held the same position. When he recalled him, his partner's expression changed. The author analyzed everything carefully and proposed a partnership. The king wanted to sign the contract, and the prince was incredibly impressed by what he had heard. The young man approached and shook his hand immediately. The man knew that there would be many more characters in this story, and that they did not fully realize their own worth. The young man wanted to establish good relationships with everyone. This helped him greatly in the future, but it was quite a difficult task. The gentlemen set off together on an exciting journey in search of monsters. They hadn't gone far when they noticed goblin tracks, and the gentlemen realized they were on the right track. In this story, they were paid about 200,000 coins for every tower they knocked down. And then the handsome fellow spotted a huge boar. The king was terrified. His partner explained that he simply couldn't defeat it with a pistol, but the prince still wanted to try regardless of the odds. The warrior said he had a magnificent pistol that could do much more than the others. The young man was frightened and begged him not to do it. The young man took his weapon, selected the right cartridge, and calmly aimed at his target. But then, unexpectedly, he let out a loud scream. The man stood atop a mountain that was quite high. He fired the long-awaited shot, and the gentleman couldn't take it and simply fell to the ground. Jack knew that if he killed the boar, his weapon would double its power level. The handsome young man was pleasantly surprised by the result of his shot. The agent crawled over on his knees and praised his friend for such flawless work. He was pleased with the pistol, and his partner smiled. Suddenly, the prince made another loud movement. The boy got scared again and asked what had happened this time. The author replied that a black pelican had been flying by. The man had seen a lot in his life, which is why he reacted so flawlessly. He decided to find a way out of this tall tower. while the young man was still kneeling. He asked him to wait a moment. The man complied, and they went down together to see the result of the man's work. The boar was enormous. The handsome man said there would be no problem getting paid for such a job. They shook hands and decided to celebrate the day. The king asked what he did with his fee. His partner replied that he usually bought stocks, and the prince was pleasantly surprised by the news. Some time passed, and the warrior decided to do a little work on the computer. He wanted to spend some time tweaking various settings. If you buy stocks, you can make a large sum of money in an instant. That's exactly what the hero wanted to do. Lately, this source of income had been gaining momentum. The young man suddenly remembered the chameleons he had written about in his books. They were the main villains. This organization consisted of con artists. They were criminals, though they didn't look like human monsters. He really wanted to talk to the leader of this gang and figure out what was going on. As soon as the young man calmed down, thinking he'd come up with a decent plan, his computer suddenly shut down and stopped working. He didn't understand what was happening. The man picked up the device and started wondering what had caused the malfunction, but nothing unusual turned up, and after a couple of minutes, it turned back on. Meanwhile, a young couple was relaxing in a cafe and discussing the person sitting across from them. The group even speculated that the people sitting in front of them might be celebrities. The handsome man behaved with incredible confidence and politeness. His partner didn't really like spending time in places like this, so he asked when he could go home. The girl asked him to put up with the commotion a little longer. The prince wanted to calm down and check his gadgets to see if anyone had sent him any new messages. The little girl sat quietly and said almost nothing. A young woman walked into the establishment. The guy immediately perked up and decided to go meet her. The princess sat calmly, her face showing no emotion. The man knew that his acquaintance had been to the hospital, so the first thing he did was ask if she was all right. The woman replied very coldly, saying that it was nothing serious. The young woman decided to talk about a friend of hers. The queen looked surprised and wanted to know who they were going to talk about. As it turned out, the woman wanted to tell them about the incident that happened at the museum. There had been 3 of them there that day, and her friends listened to every word. That day, the monsters were much stronger than they had thought, and as it turned out, no one but Jack could stop such a thief. The handsome man tore off his arm with an ordinary pistol. The lady watched this with wide, astonished eyes filled with great fear. The girl added that she and the beauty were on the same team. The little one choked sharply, and the young lady asked what her friend thought of her partner. The princess didn't know what to do, so she decided to lose herself in her thoughts. The young lady thought about her friend, who had been an ordinary person but had since become someone else. The young lady intended to conduct some sort of investigation to find out what the prince wanted from her, and she wondered if she was dealing with a monster. The newlyweds looked at their old acquaintance in surprise. They wondered why she had such negative thoughts in her head, while the group enjoyed their tea, and Jack's computer lit up again. It was shining incredibly brightly. The handsome young man decided to close his eyes to it and somehow stop the glare. Some kind of update was taking a very long time to load on the computer. No one knew what it could mean. The king began to feel strange and often looked angry. The protagonist's head was splitting with pain. He wanted to find something that could help him with this, but there was nothing at hand. The guy decided to ask the girl a question, namely whether she liked the man that a group of people had been talking about for so long. The beauty just smiled. The little girl didn't want to answer that. She was eager to see her brother. He was an important person to her, and the young lady was looking forward to the meeting. The next day, everyone who had fought the monster at the museum received their full points, and a notification about the funds appeared on the young man's watch. Finally, the gentleman's gadget was updated, and new skills had been added. During the lecture, the gentleman became curious about what exactly had changed, and the class continued. The woman asked him to keep it down a bit and not distract her from the lecture. The handsome guy was surprised because he hadn't said anything, but the young woman disagreed and had a different opinion. The king asked if the queen had forgotten that he had saved her. The woman looked at him with a stony expression that once again seemed dissatisfied with something. The lady was behaving rather rudely. The girl decided to get up and leave her companion. The prince didn't understand what was going on. He asked the beauty about it. The young man decided to talk to the guy, or rather, to thank him for that fight at the museum. The man didn't understand what he was being thanked for. Although the man didn't have very high self-esteem, he was well aware that he had played an important role that day, because it was thanks to him that the thief had fallen to his knees for the first time. Joe was very mysterious today. He usually talked much more. The gentleman was pondering how he could become a little better than the others. The speaker shouted and asked everyone to get ready, and a minute later, a handsome guy walked in, heading somewhere with great confidence. The king was annoyed that he was being made to run back and forth. He was ranked 37th among all the heroes, while while his partner was considered high-ranking. An incredibly important moment had arrived for all the cadets, namely the award ceremony. The girl stood confidently and wanted to take a seat. Everyone was asked to come up on stage and wait for the judges' verdicts. The newlyweds gathered and came together, and a warrior presented the award. First, the young man approached Joe and asked if it was him. The answer was yes. The man wasn't surprised that everyone respected him so much. The young man decided to give him some advice. He should not go elsewhere but work here. It would be better for him to be a monster hunter than to hold any other position. The gentleman politely thanked him for the advice, but he was still thinking about whether to take it. Heroes bore a very heavy responsibility, and the pay wasn't very good. The handsome young man asked the next person to come to him. The lady was a little shy, but she gritted her teeth and decided to approach him after all. The king explained that the little girl's father had asked him to look after her and occasionally check whether she was faithfully carrying out the heroine's tasks. Then Jack approached his partner. He looked at him with curiosity, since they weren't acquainted. So the young man decided to introduce himself and tell him about himself. The cadets' award ceremony ended on a positive note. The man was over the moon with happiness. He had finally received what he had been waiting for so eagerly, his glasses. With his hard-earned money, the man decided to buy shares again, specifically in a large livestock farm. The gentleman decided to look up the information. Fortunately, the gadget was working fine. Suddenly, something tickled the king's hand, and he quickly jumped up, sending the bag flying to the side. His partner decided to calm down and check the information displayed on the device. You could even buy something for yourself there. You could buy various features there. Absolutely all the characters had tried to do something there at some point, and the prince was no exception. He wanted to take a look, and then an incredibly beautiful girl approached the young man. She wanted to talk to him. The young man's gaze turned to her, and the beauty introduced herself. The heroine was surprised to see how quickly the gentleman had left the award ceremony. The young girl wanted to pass something on to him. Jack knew that if the young lady had given him her business card, it meant a lot. She asked if she could ask him one question, but the handsome young man didn't answer. The author knew exactly what kind of person was standing before him, so he didn't want to answer her. Appearance didn't always play a major role, and the conversation stalled a bit. The king continued the conversation because he knew the young lady had powerful connections, so it was in his partner's best interest to talk to her. Everything was going according to plan. The princess decided to reveal a little about herself, namely that she was very interested in the warrior, and she asked him to appreciate that. The young man thanked her for that, but he said he had no guarantee that this conversation was sincere. The lady was very surprised and didn't know how to respond. The man knew that his companion was simply showing interest and that there was nothing more to her words. The young man gathered his things and went about his business. The queen was surprised by the way the conversation ended, and the gentleman recalled that he had some new features and had decided to test them out on himself. Crescentchuk felt strange. He wanted it all to come true, and his movements were getting much better, so the king wanted to find a way to control it. When the hero found himself in this wondrous world, he realized that wielding magic was incredibly cool. He liked that such a feature existed here. Now the Book of Truth lay before the author. It contained only truthful information that had been verified over the years, and the young man studied it all with his eyes. There were various rumors that it could answer any question. The young man wanted to test this for himself and asked it how tall he was. The answer was correct. On the one hand, the young man was very pleased to hear such an answer because he could continue to ask her various questions, but on the other hand, it infuriated him. A red light flashed on the clock, and a message appeared stating that people were looking for the person who last saw the cadets from Nuri's class. About 6 cadets had gone missing in the past month. Everyone was in a panic and didn't know how to react. Rescuers were now on the scene, and the soldier began to think about it. The number of victims kept growing and changing. Some suspected that this criminal was tormenting all the heroes of this world. The evil man's final target was small. If the young lady were to die because of the author's intervention, it would become a very big problem for everyone. Time was about to put everything in its place. The young man was talking to a colleague, and he asked his friend to look the other way. A group of people approached rudely and began to misbehave. Jack felt uncomfortable. The handsome young man had never had any experience with violence. The character couldn't let some bad people insult his friend. His partner stopped him, asking him not to get involved in such matters. The prince decided to present various facts to the warrior to convince him not to get into a fight. The young man wanted to prove to him that the gang had deliberately targeted his friend. The man sincerely wanted to warn his friend not to get into any trouble, but the prince thought differently. In his eyes, one had to defend one's own. After a couple of minutes of conversation, the gentleman realized that, in fact, a close friend didn't like his companion and even sometimes openly envied him. To make matters worse, an angry mentor arrived. He yelled at everyone very loudly and asked what they were doing there, then asked everyone to gather around. He was holding the exam results. The coach decided to hang them on the wall so everyone could come and see where they had placed. When Jack saw himself among the top scorers, he wasn't surprised. He had cheated on the entire exam. Some cadets didn't make it through. They were very upset and didn't know what to do next. Standing next to the handsome guy was an English princess who had taken third place in this ranking showing, who had been accepted into the club. The peers began to chat. The young people congratulated the young woman on her successful admission to the club. She was also incredibly happy. All classes were conducted exclusively in Korean. The young woman replied that she would work on herself every day. She was confident that everything would work out, and the queen wanted to live up to people's expectations. One of the students presented a completely different perspective on the real world. His classmates listened attentively to their friend. No one interrupted anyone. The queen supported him as well, but she understood that he was her direct competitor, so she decided to take a cue from him. The young woman had no desire to find out what the young man usually did or what his preferences were. Anger began to surface in the girl. She didn't like confident people. Meanwhile, the hero sat working at his computer. He decided that if he had gotten his hands on the Book of Truth, he needed to use it properly. Thanks to this amazing book, it was possible to find out any information. Not many people knew about the handsome guy yet, but he wanted to change that. The king wanted to tweak his settings a bit and upgrade his weapons. Everything was fine with him, but there was no smile on his face. Unfortunately, this was because the prince lacked the skills to defeat the monster, even though the warrior had quite a lot of points. On a whim, the guy decided to buy himself a new weapon, specifically a sniper rifle that was already much more powerful than his previous pistol. With this new sniper rifle, the man was happier because he could spot his opponents, but unfortunately, he had no technical skills at all, which was a major drawback. For an archer, it was incredibly important to be able to assume the correct stance and shoot accurately at the target. The young man wanted to master this skill. The man did everything but felt nothing. He hoped it would all work out. Suddenly, a message lit up on the watch, and everyone was talking again about the thief who had been kidnapping cadets. Our hero was well aware of who was behind all this, but he didn't know if he should intervene, because the gentleman was risking his life. A new day began, and with it came new challenges. The coach was yelling as usual. He asked if everyone was ready for the challenges. Today was a special training session. Behind him stood a large structure containing a variety of simulations of real monsters. The cadets listened intently to everything the handsome guy told them. First, he wanted to divide everyone into groups and then get started on the task. He asked them to do this immediately, and the students quickly sorted themselves into groups. In front of Jack was a large chart showing who was in which group. Inside the structure were many different traps. Just in case, the king decided to make 5 special cartridges. He was curious to see if he could pass such a test, since he had never done anything like this before. The partner asked everyone to gather quickly. The cadets were a bit flustered, and some didn't understand what task to perform, so the prince decided to yell at them. One of the girls responded with aggression. The warrior hadn't expected to hear such a thing directed at him. Her temperament was quite difficult and hard to understand. The young man approached the girl and greeted her. He said he was pleased that they were on the same team, and she reciprocated his sentiment. The princess looked surprised and pointed her finger. She asked if the lady was also in her group. For a couple of minutes, no one heard a reply. After a while, the young woman decided to overcome her shyness and greeted everyone. The queen was eager to learn more about her. It occurred to the young man that the woman's psychological weakness had greatly intensified, and that during the task, there was a high probability of the devil's servants infiltrating. Jack decided to act according to the situation. He knew a lot about his competitors and their weaknesses, so he wanted to strike right there. Although his peers were no slouches either, they started with greetings. Everyone wanted to get to know each other, and the handsome guy told them about his team. As the team captain, the woman stepped forward and wanted to introduce her teammates. Not everyone looked confident, and her partner's eyes kept darting around. Next, another prince was introduced. He was a German finance student, considered a very promising player, and had undergone elite training. The club was home to a large number of foreigners who all shared the same dream. This young man was no exception. He joined the club hoping to reach the very top, but unfortunately, reality turned out to be a bit different. To put it mildly, not so simple. Due to the great skill of his peers, he simply became an ordinary student. At that difficult moment, the man felt that he was not like everyone else. He later developed psychological instability and various medical problems. The man was studying information on the computer when suddenly a gentleman approached him and asked if he was a good shot. The handsome man asked him to shoot well on the mission. The king quickly withdrew his hand and asked what was going on. His partner mocked the hero and said loudly that he wasn't in the mood today, while the prince tried not to pay any attention. Lately, the warrior's reputation had taken a bit of a hit. He used to feel much better than he did today. The guy thought that if they were on the same team, everyone should treat each other with respect. The coach announced that they all had to enter as a single team. The groups were sent in according to their numbers. The young man decided to talk to the young woman. The young woman responded very coldly because she didn't want to talk to anyone at such an important moment for her. All the cadets entered the cave. It was quite eerie in there. There were also an incredible number of tunnels. The peers stopped and wanted to decide where they would go next. No one had any ideas, so the newlyweds decided to discuss it. While no one could say anything, Jack suggested going into tunnel number 6. His friends turned to him and listened intently. The handsome guy started laughing slyly again and decided not to listen to the king. He humiliated him even when there were plenty of other colleagues around. The girl said he didn't look very well. His partner took such harsh words differently now, and the beauty added that he had a good eye. The prince realized that they were trying to provoke him in any way possible to get him worked up, so he decided it would be better to let the girl take the blame. The man was still insulting his companion, so the young man asked him to keep a closer eye out for monsters that could appear at any moment. The gentleman simply laughed at his colleague and asked where he had seen any monsters here. The young man decided to focus his attention on the cave, which seemed to go on forever. One of the players wanted to test his arrow. Everyone stepped back because a huge explosion was about to happen, and everything went exactly as the team had planned. Unexpectedly, a monster with huge eyes and teeth jumped out. It was 6 levels higher than the average level. Everyone shouted and told everyone to get ready for battle. The newlyweds took their positions and were ready to fight to the end, and the team drew their weapons. Someone shouted, "Does anyone have water attributes?" Jack immediately replied that it was too early to do that. The beauty decided not to stand idly by, but to take action. The little girl ordered them to open fire on the thief's center. The monster was no pushover, so they had to come up with some kind of tactic against his mighty strength. The whole team quickly rushed at him and began striking him in the back. Everyone attacked from different sides, hoping to win, and the monster grew angry. The young woman caught him with her long rope. She said that the cave was about to change. Her teammates were curious what this might mean for them. To everyone's surprise, the queen reached a state of enlightenment. She looked very beautiful to the young man. And then an idea came to the woman's mind. The woman stood still, and her partner quickly ran up and shielded her. Everyone was frightened. The newlyweds lay on the cold floor. Time seemed to stand still. When the girl's emotional state had stabilized, she asked them not to touch her and to let her go. The man immediately complied with his partner's request. The beauty was so enraged that he had touched her that she wanted to hit him. But suddenly her attention shifted to something else. There was a threat from the monster. People saw a strange arrow sticking out of the wall. As it turned out, it was a giant poisonous weapon, and the young woman wanted to find out who could have fired it. The next bullet struck the new cadet squarely in the back. He screamed in pain. He begged them to leave him and not help, but his comrades couldn't do that. Later, when the friends analyzed these shots, they realized that training couldn't involve such harsh methods. Something was wrong here. The girl hoisted the boy onto her back to somehow get him to safety, but then various rocks began falling from the sky. The beauty had no idea the ordeal would be so grueling. The battle was just heating up. The opponent's strikes were very strong and accurate. It was quite a grueling training session, but the peers didn't want to give up. The number of thieves kept growing. They were coming at them from all sides. The heroes held a defense that could collapse at any moment. Everyone was terrified. Jack fired his pistol skillfully. His bullets were better and more accurate. The young woman fought back with her own weapon, and they were starting to get the hang of it. The handsome man, with his head held high, said they had almost succeeded. He held his sword on his shoulders, and the queen did not like this attitude. After the expected battle, everyone relaxed and decided to discuss where they would go next. The king stood in despair. Something had happened to him. In his mind, the hero replayed the arrow that had narrowly missed the woman's head. Even the cadets didn't understand what was going on, and the prince thought it was some kind of trap. The companions decided to think it all through, when suddenly, a bright yellow light appeared out of nowhere. They decided to flee as quickly as possible. When the boy turned his head toward the glow, he said just one word, "Salamander." She wasn't dead yet. The woman also stopped because she saw that her friend had fallen far behind. The monster was shooting fire at the man, so the woman rushed immediately to his aid, and then the young man quickly changed the magic settings on his hand, and now he was releasing water. He saved everyone with a round sphere of water that hovered above everyone's heads. The team was stunned by the power of their opponent. Everyone's mouths dropped open, and the partner watched everything with wide eyes. He couldn't believe what was happening. The fire attack was real, not a training exercise. And on top of that, the master rushed toward the young man, wanting to settle the score at such a difficult time for the team. The handsome young man had a number of grievances that he wasn't afraid to voice. Jack curled up and begged him to back off, while the young woman asked the kings to calm down. There was no time now to figure out who was right and who was wrong. The queen asked once more if the monster was real. The woman didn't understand what he was doing there. The tunnels were very similar to real ones, so the lady thought that real monsters could simply crawl through this passage. The team didn't want to slow down, so they decided to go look for more adventures. They wanted to earn as many points as possible for their work.